Not long to go now to the 2024 Sanlam Cape Town Marathon. And today we're talking about the perfect pacing strategy for the Cape Town Marathon. We're going to be digging into what the correct strategy is. Should it be even split? So first half, same as the second half. Should it be a negative split? Should you be going faster in the second than the first? Or should you be banking time in the first so that you run a positive split and have enough time in the second half? Plus, we're going to be looking at how to set your intensity in the first and second kilometer to ensure that you do run the perfect Cape Town Marathon. I've got Lindsey Parry with me once again. My name is Brad Nadalt. Lindsey, great to catch up. You and I both running Cape Town this year. Excitement is definitely building.
No, absolutely. And you took the words out of my mouth a little bit. I was going to say that this conversation is actually perfect because both of us need to hear it again to make sure that we get our races dialed in properly and do it like you're supposed to do it on the 20th of October.
Yeah, I definitely do have ulterior motives because if you look at my splits from last year's race, you'll definitely know that I didn't get this right. And that's why I wanted to have this conversation. But the good news is, too, we do have pacing charts that we've put together as well. If you scan the QR code that's on screen right now, you'll be able to get access. But Lindsey, let's jump straight into this conversation and let's talk about the perfect strategy. Should we be going even splits across the two halves, so exactly the same first half to second half? Should we be banking time in the first half and hanging on for dear life in the second, which is kind of what I did last year? Or should we be going for a negative split? What's the best way to pace the Cape Town Marathon?
So there's no question at all that the most comfortable strategy to follow, also the best in terms of getting the best time, but 100% the most comfortable strategy to follow is either a slight negative split or even split race. The bigger your positive split is, the more uncomfortable the race is going to be. And I've got this working theory that I actually need to pump some stats into that says that whatever you're capable of on the day, you will get close to, regardless of the three strategies that you follow. You will be slightly worse if you are following a positive strategy just because of how difficult it is to mentally keep yourself going. But the bottom line is that if you are capable for 4 hours in the marathon and you go through halfway in 1 hour 50, you are going to lose a minimum of 10 minutes in the second half. So you will still only at best be able to hang on for an incredibly uncomfortable 4 hours and probably be a bit slower. The even pace strategy gives you the most control. And it's the race that's probably, if you've got it a little bit wrong, is forgiving enough that you will be able to get a negative split, and probably that's the ideal strategy to set out because it does allow for a little bit of a margin for error. Of course, the most conservative strategy is to plan for a negative split. But if you plan for too much of a negative split, again, often in the second half, it's not so much physical condition that holds you back. It's actually a little bit more linked to the mental ability to keep driving yourself forward and pushing hard in the second half. So my preferred strategy, especially for a race like Cape Town, and I think that's where you're going to want to go next, Brad, is like we also have to take into the actual route dynamics. And for Cape Town, what does that mean in terms of the first half versus the second half?
Yeah, absolutely. And before we get into that route and just digging into that, because we actually do have a video that's the full route run through that I will share later in this video too. But Lindsey, let's talk about sort of setting yourself up for success early on in the race, because this was my experience last year, is I started out feeling fantastic and I looked at my watch and I knew I was going too fast. And last year the wind was pumping on the way out of the city and I still carried on at that pace, knowing what was coming, because there's no ways that I could have kept up that pace for the whole marathon. And it played out exactly as I thought it would. But how do you regulate yourself early on? Like, what's the strategy to make sure that you're setting that intensity right for your pacing so that later on in the race you don't blow up?
Yeah, so in many ways, for me, running a successful marathon is about getting the first 2 kilometers right. Okay, we are excited. We are fresh and we're surrounded by a lot of people that are going to run too hard, and that sucks you along. So it doesn't matter what distance you run, 5, half marathon, marathon, we always start too fast. And the problem is that we often just decide to roll with it because we are feeling so good and fresh and because we are fit for the marathon. And so that is your most dangerous part in the race. And that's where you have to get it under control. So for me, split number 1 and split number 2 are so important in terms of setting the right intensity. So if you know what those splits are supposed to be, then you can get that excitement out of your system in kilometer 1, readjust again at kilometer 2, and then from then on in, you are going to be able to control that relative intensity, and then hopefully we'll start getting the feedback that you want. But that's why it's so important to have a plan full stop. If you know what you're capable of, you work out how you're going to get to that point, and then you use kilometer 1 and 2 to make sure. Too many times I've had the conversation with people where they just tell me they felt so good. And then maybe around 8 or 9 Ks, they think to themselves, okay, I do feel like I'm working a little bit harder than I should be at this stage of the race, but still no adjustment is made. And when you run like that, what typically happens is that you get to halfway, and you start to have thoughts like, ooh, I'm only halfway. Or just after halfway, you kind of feel like you reaching for your next gel a bit quicker than you normally need that gel. 23 to 26 kilometers, you start to get a little bit sore and you go, ooh, this is actually how I'm supposed to feel around 28 to 32 kilometers. And like, I guess what I'm saying is that by going too fast for the first 8 to 12 Ks, it literally pulls everything that happens to you in a marathon 5 to 8 kilometers sooner. And so that when you get to the point where you're really supposed to dig deep mentally and physically at between 35 and 37 Ks, that point actually arrives at 28 to 30 Ks. And although 12 Ks doesn't feel like far, and you've run that so many times in training already, what actually happens is that you mentally just start to go, I can't sustain this. And then it gets slower and slower and slower.
Yeah, Lindsey, it's so. I mean, it's listening to you talk about that. That was my race experience last year, exactly to the T. That getting to halfway and just not loving life, and that's not the way you want to feel when you get to halfway. Let's without going into too many race specifics, because we like of the route. Let's talk a little bit about like the best way to approach this whole thing. I mean, you spoke in the slightly negative to even split, but how would that look practically come race day?
Yeah. So look, you're going to split the race up essentially into first half, second half. And then within the first half and the second half, you want to look at the routes and go, okay, what are the general principles? So you're going to effectively take our route talk, and sit and figure these things out together. But what we do know is that it's a slightly quicker start. So the very early kilometers are just that little bit faster with the new route. And that's, again, another reason why it's important to just pull everything back, make sure that you're running at the right intensity. We know then that main road is a bit deceptively harder than people give it credit for. So you don't want to be burning too hard along those sections. So your pacing chart needs to um, take that into account. And then what we also know is that the last kilometers have got a little bit of a pull in them up plain streets, and then it has a matching downhill. So again, for me, that is why when you look at the Cape Town Marathon route, there's a fairly similar amount of work that happens in the first half and the second half. And pretty much every time you need to go up a little bit, even if it doesn't come immediately, there's an equal down somewhere along the line. So we want to work towards a fairly even pace strategy for the first half and the second half. And then when it gets down to the nitty gritty of actually planning, how do I execute on that? You will take those little sections and go, okay, I'm going to be 15 to 30 seconds slower there per K, but then 3Ks later, I'm going to be 15 to 20 seconds faster through that section. And that's really how you're going to line it up. But for me, Cape Town lends itself well to an even-paced race, even on a very windy day. And I think that's maybe for me a more important thing to touch on, is that we can end up with quite a windy day. And the important thing on a windy day is that you don't fight the wind. With the prevailing wind directions in Cape Town, if you have a lot of wind in one half, you're going to have a lot of wind at your back in the other half. So that's a very important distinction to make, so that you don't drill yourself in the first half. And in that scenario, you would change your thinking a little bit. So if the first half is really with the wind, okay, then we have to change to a slight positive split strategy. We're going to make up a little bit of time, and then we're going to lose that time at the end. But typically for Cape Town, it's the other way around. We have the wind in the first half. So at best, we'll be even, slightly positive in that scenario. But our general plan at Cape Town is to be very even paced. So maybe between 1 to 2 minutes faster, slower, but between the two. And that balance will depend a little bit on the day and how you approach it. But a minute to a minute and a half too fast, that's very forgiving. You'll lose almost the same amount of time. 2, 3, 4 minutes too fast, that's when the time starts to pile up on the other end, and it becomes at least what you went too quick, plus another 50 to 100%. So, I used the 150. I was being a bit extreme there. I mean, if you're a 4 hour and you go through 150, you're probably staring like a 4:15 in the face, because you're going to lose a lot of time in the second half.
Yeah. As I said at the start of this video, we do have pacing charts available. If you scan the QR code that's on screen right now, you can also click on the link that's in the description. You can grab yours. You can pick them up from our stand at the expo. Lindsey, something I didn't mention at the start of the video that I think is important to touch on is how to decide what the right goal is to go for. Because that also will dictate your pacing strategy. I mean, yeah, I want to run a sub 3 hour marathon, but there's no ways I'm capable of running a 3 hour marathon. How do you go about choosing the right pacing, like the time, your goal time?
Yeah, so it absolutely needs to be based on something that you have done, Brad. And in the build-up, you've hopefully done a 5, a 10, or hopefully a half marathon that you've got in the mix there. And then if you've done those, you're going to jump onto our race calculator. You're going to pump in those numbers, and it's going to give you a realistic number to target. And that's just so key. That target needs to be based on what am I capable of over 5, 10, 21, plus what training have I done? So does my training, even though I've performed well, let's say at a 5 kilometer, does the training then match that, so that the speed that I'm capable of at, I can replicate over the long distance? So yeah, when you go and buy that pacing chart, just plug in some numbers and listen to that, because that is where we see a lot of people go wrong. They either get goal escalation as they're tapering, or they just have too much ambition for really what they're capable of, or what they've trained for. I can confirm that this week I had a really tough training session that's got me going like, do not inflate your goal at all. Possibly even get a bit more conservative about it. But often it's the other way around. As we freshen up, and we get goal escalation.
Yeah, absolutely. And the route is so important. And we've done a whole route run through. So that does tie into your pacing strategy. And if you watch the video that's on screen right now, we'll talk you through section by section exactly how to attack each of those sections of the Cape Town Marathon route to ensure that you run the perfect race in 2024.